Fucking kill him. Kill him already, kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Kill him already, kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Kill him already, kill him. Just fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking
Quick heads up, have you ever wondered precisely what I mean when I use the term client journalism? And I use it quite a lot these days because, my goodness me, someone has to. Then just have a little look at the Sun and the Daily Mail today if you're passing a newsagents, or indeed if they have them on display in your local library. If you want to see a sort of dictionary definition of what client journalism, which is itself probably a bit of a euphemism for propaganda, looks like, then fair play to the editors of the Daily Mail and the Sun today for providing us with an absolute masterclass of what a complete dereliction of journalistic duty in the service of an utterly undeserving political leader looks like. So well done, everybody, on that one. Can I paint a picture for you this morning? I want you to imagine, if you can, a very heavy toddler. I make no judgment about the weight of the toddler. I am merely describing the weight of the toddler, a very heavy toddler, who is a little bit stubborn and is sitting in the aisle of your local supermarket, smearing himself with yoghurt and furiously resisting any attempt by his mother to move him along. Now, he's so heavy and so covered in yoghurt and so stubborn that the poor mother, who is of a relatively delicate build and disposition, the poor mother hasn't got a clue how to shift this lump of humanity, this yoghurt-smeared lump of humanity, from the supermarket aisle. And a small crowd is gathering. That's us, by the way, if you haven't worked out what this analogy is yet. We are the small crowd. A small crowd is gathering in the supermarket, looking on with a sense of wonder and perhaps for some people a degree of disgust, because there's a lot of yoghurt and there's a lot of smearing going on, and wondering how the hell this poor woman is ever going to get this lump of yoghurt-smeared humanity out of the supermarket aisle so that normal business can be resumed and the rest of us can get on with the important business of shopping. If you haven't worked it out yet, the mewling, yoghurt-smeared, excessively heavy toddler is Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of these islands for now. And the delicate, dismayed mother, failing miserably to move him even a single inch from his place in the supermarket aisle, is the Conservative Party. And the small crowd that is gathering to witness this horror show of parental nightmare, well, that's you and me today, and that is really probably how today's show is going to take shape. We're going to have a little chat with each other about the sight in front of us, the screaming yoghurt-smeared toddler refusing to move, insisting even that he's not a yoghurt-smeared toddler, but is in fact the king of the world, and therefore nobody can tell him to move from this supermarket aisle, regardless of how much evidence has been gathered that nobody really wants him to be there at all, least of all his mother, who we're also going to talk about. What on earth can she do to get rid of this yoghurt-smeared lump of humanity that is holding up business for pretty much everybody else in the supermarket? The phone lines are open. If you can make head nor tail of the words that have come out of my mouth thus far, the phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I've enjoyed the clipping of the question lately, the attempt to focus upon particular constituencies of callers, but I need a little bit of guidance. I never know how many people listen to the programme in the hope of ringing in. It's a tiny proportion of the people listening, just by dint of numbers. If there's 1.4 million people listening and we get through, I don't know, about 30 calls per show, then obviously it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. But if I say I only want to hear from people in a certain constituency and you are not yourself in that constituency, I'd hate to think that you felt alienated or excluded from proceeding. So do let me know if you don't like this approach to the yoghurt-smeared toddler, because I am interested chiefly today in the opinions of people, and only first up, we'll move the spotlight, obviously, in the opinions of people who have either never voted anything but Conservative, or find it very hard, have found it very hard to contemplate voting anything but Conservative in the past. I I don't know whether I coined this phrase or not. I'm certainly claiming the credit for it. That's the nature of the game, isn't it? But I talked a lot not long ago, and I wrote quite a lot about something that I like to call footballification. And the idea of footballification is that once you have pledged your loyalty to your team, as in football, obviously, then nothing can sway you from that position. You might abuse your own team if they make you unhappy, but you will never stop supporting them. And however much you may abuse them in the short term, you will always despise their opponents with a passion that defies logic and rationality. And I don't know whether I was right to suggest that footballification had moved up several gears in the last few years. I think I was. I think that Brexit I think even Conservative MPs now are describing it as having the air of a religious cult, this absolute commitment to a word that they can't even describe or define anymore. It's like the unknowable nature of Brexit. But leaving that aside, for me, that's when footballification reached ludicrous levels. Truly ludicrous levels. I don't care what is happening on the pitch. If a player in my team's shirt turns up with a taser and starts knocking out the opponent's defence, then that is categorically not a foul. And any referee who blows his whistle after my centre forward pulls out a taser and nobbles the opposition goalkeeper, the referee is a wing forward in a rugby scrum, to mix my metaphors, a flanker. The referee's a flanker. So I know that. And the whole theory of footballification, of course, is that nothing will ever make you take that scarf off. It is knotted indeed so tightly around your neck that the flow of blood to your brain has been almost entirely cut off. All you can do is a sort of tribal, bovine bark of loyalty towards a team decided upon entirely by the colour of the shirt. You don't even know the names of the players anymore. You don't know the tactics. You've got no idea what the score is. You might even have turned up at the wrong stadium, but if there's a team on the park dressed in green, you're going to be screaming for them until the cows come home. And that's a lot of people. Oddly, they're the least important people in politics because they will not affect change. The only people who really we should bother talking with or talking about in politics are the people who vote differently almost every election, or the people that approach any ballot with a truly open mind or a sense of curiosity about what might be best for them, or what might be best for the country, or what might be best for as yet unspecified interests. And yet here we are. We are in a footballified society. It broke a bit yesteryear. It broke a bit yesteryear for a lot of people who perhaps lean towards values like equality or like fairness and distribution of wealth, because the Labour Party ended up being led for quite a long time by somebody who many traditional Labour supporters found it impossible to cheer for. They did manage to remove or at least loosen their scarves to a sufficient degree that they could not only boo their own manager while despairing at what he was doing to the team, but they could even contemplate perhaps, and this is the simplest explanation for the Red Wall's collapse, they could even contemplate perhaps cheering for the opposition, something that their parents and their grandparents had never even dreamt of doing in decades. But so that's a useful reminder that however tightly knotted the scarf may seem to be, there's no such thing as an untiable knot. So today, I think I would like people who probably reject the footballification description. So I'm not suggesting that you are tribal to the exclusion of all reason and intelligence, but you certainly would not ever have expected to be not voting Conservative. So there is a great piece in, I think it's in the newspaper today, about a Conservative club in one of the constituencies that's currently out for a by-election, where members of staff at the actual Conservative club are sort of saying they're going to either vote for a different party or they're not going to vote at all. And that's the constituency I'm most interested in. I don't know if we want to explore the extremities. Nick had the pleasure of doing that this morning with a caller who suggested Nadine Dorries would make an excellent replacement for Prime Minister. And as far as I'm aware, that was a genuine caller, not Rosie Holt, the satirist that we broadcast on the programme yesterday. So I don't know if we need to explore those extremities, although obviously if they present themselves, then we shall pay them the respect that they deserve. But I do want to talk to people who, until relatively recently, would perhaps have used a phrase like dyed-in-the-wool conservative, or lifelong conservative, or traditional conservative. What do you make of all this? How do you process the fact that Boris Johnson now has split your party in a way that no leader, even leaders whose names over the years have rightly or wrongly become bywords for divisiveness, like Margaret Thatcher, even they didn't manage to secure such a low level of support from their own MPs. If you exclude the politicians on the so-called payroll, the ones that have positions in this government, you're looking at about 75% of Conservative backbenchers no longer have confidence in their leader. And these numbers are simply staggering. I think one of the dangers of false equivalence in the British media, as practiced chiefly by the BBC, is that when someone like James Cleverly comes forward, or Simon Hart, trying to pretend that this is anything other than an absolute nightmare, a humiliating nightmare for Boris Johnson, because they hold senior positions, because Jacob Rees-Mogg is in the cabinet, you have almost a... I've said to you a few times that we don't know how to deal with a level of madness that the Constitution, unwritten though it may be, was not designed to accommodate. The same thing happened in America. So a senior cabinet minister turns up on your telly to tell you that this is a brilliant result for Boris Johnson and everybody should celebrate, and he's finally silenced his critics and it's proof of yada, yada, yada. And you sort of sit there going, but, you know, that's simply not true. The emperor's got no clothes on. And yet still the British media has to report it. And the minute it gets reported, it gets afforded a patina of credibility, doesn't it? It gets a sort of coating of credibility, of plausibility, and that's really damaging, because it is a little bit like a BBC reporter or a newspaper reporter saying sections of the crowd insisted that the emperor was naked, and yet many of his most ardent supporters were describing the luxuriant nature of his new robes in poetic detail. And you sort of think, well, that's not really journalism. Either the emperor's got no clothes on, or he has. And we can all see that he hasn't. So why are people like James Cleverly and Dominic Raab queuing up on the telly this morning to tell you that he's wearing beautiful? I do not know. But I do know this. We're essentially a decent bunch in this country. Essentially. There are exceptions to that observation, and sometimes perhaps the squeakier the pips get, the more tempting it is to behave in a selfish fashion, or in an unkind or a self-interested fashion. But we are essentially a decent bunch, I believe. Whatever colour your scarf is, we have common ground to share together. This is something that Keir Starmer is trying desperately to reintroduce to political debate, with a degree of success. But I do believe we have common ground in well, that's why we use the word common to describe it, don't we? So whatever colour your scarf is, there are things upon which historically and traditionally we would always agree. And usually those issues get filed under values. Just basic values, basic expectations of decency. Boris Johnson has none. That's a matter of fact now. It's a matter of record. He has no decency. He will never do what is right. He will only ever act in a way he perceives to be in his own best interests. And how many times have I said to you, he doesn't overcome problems, he just sits tight until they've gone away. And that brings us back to the yogurt-smeared toddler, sitting in the dairy aisle of your local supermarket, adamantly and furiously refusing to budge even a single inch, despite the begging of his poor beleaguered mother. What do you, as a lifelong conservative, as a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, as a traditional conservative, what do you think about last night's events and the bigger picture of Boris Johnson's now utterly busted flush of a government? Help me wipe off the yoghurt. And in the spirit of yesterday's programme, I think we'll play a little game as well, which I will reveal the answer to shortly. Is this an impersonation? What's the word? Impressionist? Impersonator. Is this an impersonator, or is this the real Jacob Rees-Mogg?
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
148 MPs, of course, voted against Boris Johnson yesterday, although there were more of them to start with. So is that the real Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about Theresa May in a way that almost demands we come up with a new definition of double standards for the Oxford English Dictionary? Or is it one of those pesky satirists that keep plaguing politicians with all too plausible suggestions of whatever nonsense they might come out with next? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that yet. I'll just give you one more chance to listen. Is this the real dog, or is it a fake J-dog?
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
OK, so 21 minutes after 10, Conservative voters of various descriptions, various hues, but you would describe yourself as that. Call me now, tell me what you feel about unfolding events, the detail of last night and the bigger picture of the road ahead. Melanie is in Birmingham. So is Johnny Depp at the moment, Melanie. I don't know if you knew that. What made you pick up the phone today?
Oh, right. Hi.
Hello.
I'm actually on a walk with my husband.
Oh, lovely.
We're listening to your radio show.
Fantastic. What, do you share headphones, or do you have me on a small transistor?
No, he's on speaker on a small radio.
Is that allowed? I mean, what about you might be disturbing other people's peace and quiet as you...
We're in a field. There's
That's
no one
fine.
around.
I'm glad to hear it. Best place for me, Melanie. Best place for me. Now, what would you like to say?
I voted Conservative. I've never voted anything else.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed to actually say I did vote for Boris now. I think that PMs have enormous power, and when they abuse that power, you expect there to be checks and balances in place to restrict the power. What does Boris do? He tries to change the ministerial code.
Yes.
So that you're not lying to Parliament. So if you lie to Parliament, it's not necessarily sackable, should I say. I'm bitterly disappointed with the vote.
Well, you were hoping for an actual removal.
Yes,
Gosh.
I was. I actually was. I'm very disappointed because... he thinks he's done nothing wrong, so therefore he's not going to change anything because he believes he's done nothing wrong. And even if he did say he doesn't believe he's done something wrong, he's a liar.
You wouldn't believe him anyway. I
cannot believe anything he says.
That's a fascinating moment, isn't it? So even if he said what you want to hear, you wouldn't believe him anymore. Absolutely.
I've said to my husband, and he's of the opinion. For him, it's all about the rule of law. But for me, if he said everything I wanted to hear, I wouldn't believe he was going to deliver anyway. He's reneged on just about every other promise. And the funny thing is, last night I was actually playing bridge, and we have a counsellor there, a Tory counsellor, who's been a counsellor for 22 years.
Right.
And
you're not breaching any confidences here, are you?
Well,
I don't know what the rules are at bridge. Is it like Chatham House? Is it like Fight Club? The first rule of Bridge Club is that there is no Bridge Club.
Well, I like to break the rules sometimes, but let's be a bit rebellious. But funnily enough, she actually wanted Boris. She wants Boris to lose. She wanted Boris to lose at that point. We didn't know what the result was because she says you can't trust a liar. And that's a Tory council of 22 years, which did rather surprise me. So I know Rob came on, the Nick Farage, and deliver, and the big cause right. Well, he didn't get the big cause right. He hasn't got the big cause right, and they're delivering for Boris. That's all I think.
Well, I mean, crikey, you've covered a lot of ground. I guess to speculate about what motivated your bridge partner, your councillor friend, it is the fear of the further damage he's going to do to the party as much as the country by clinging on.
He's driven a coach and horses through the party, hasn't he, really? He has it, and it's sort of... I could actually vote Labour, but I don't particularly like Starmer. I don't know what he stands for.
No, I've heard that a lot.
He changes his mind. So he changes his mind. He just goes with public opinion. And I thought it was I'm deviating, but I thought it was a disgrace when he said about, there's no place for, racism in the royal family. And I'm like, hang on a minute, just because somebody makes an allegation doesn't mean it's true, and you're DPP and you come out with that comment.
Innocent until proven guilty, Melanie. Well, you'd think he was married to that principle. So your best case scenario is for the Conservative Party to replace Boris Johnson with somebody who you would have confidence in, and then you won't have to exercise too much
But I don't know who I'd have confidence in.
No.
It's very difficult. That is the problem. He's surrounded himself by yes men who are just fearful of the job. Like Richie Sunak, I'm not going to stand against him. No, because your ratings are right at the bottom. You're never going to win.
I need to ask you. Well, I sense we could do this all day. I'm going to start bidding for no Trumps in a minute to continue this conversation. When did the penny drop, if you don't mind me asking? Because you voted in 2019. When did you sort of feel?
When was I absolutely the most disgusted?
Yes.
The Owen Paternoster affair, actually. For me, to actually try and change the rules because you don't like them, it's just totally against everything I believe in. You don't change the rules because you don't like them. You live by the rules. They make the rules.
That's a brilliant answer. No, I think that people underestimate the significance of what they tried to do. And again, actually, like the rebellion against Theresa May, that was led by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the key architects of that, as indeed he was one of the key architects of the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Thank you, Melanie. That was really helpful for me, and a really neat illustration of what I was trying to explain at the top of the show about having even a lifelong commitment to a cause or to a party without having lost the ability to think freely and to think openly about the bigger issues. Because, and this may be a little unfair to other people listening, I don't really see how anyone can still be clinging to the carcass of the idea that Boris Johnson deserves their support. It almost speaks to me of a degree of self-loathing. If you have respect for yourself, how can you still be cheering for a man who has no respect for anybody? I don't know, maybe that's unfair. Kevin's in Sheffield. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Kevin.
I'm on a building site, James, so if there's any inadvertent noises, please excuse me.
I will do.
Right, I've been a Conservative voter for 40 years.
Right.
And amidst all my family are Labour voters.
Yeah.
As a young child, I was taken onto Handsworth with all the riots, all the pickets. I've seen all that. So recently I've looked at all the war, been on Discord, speaking to Russians, all this. When I get to Boris Johnson and look at the world today, I have no faith in him or anyone around him. There's corruption. They all knew what they were doing. They all knew they were breaking pandemic laws.
Yes.
They're not stupid people. And if they're going to lie to the populace like they did, because they've all lied, they all knew what were going on. They're all taking the lead from Boris Johnson.
To a point, Lord Copper, I think some of the cabinet members, and this isn't to excuse their conduct or defend them, but I think there'd be people in the Conservative Party who were as shocked as we were to discover what was going on in Downing Street. I really do. Perhaps I'm being naive, Kevin, but I really do believe that.
Maybe so, because, there were people who might not have been in the premises. I mean, anyone in those premises over Christmas, I think they're all guilty.
Yeah.
They all knew what was going on. No one said anything. So, and who we're going to vote for? As a Conservative, I look across the party now, the ranks, I don't see anyone. I can't see.
It's early days. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, and the moles haven't actually put their heads up through the holes yet. So you can't decide which moles you're going to whack until they've actually poked their heads above the parapet. Can I ask you what I asked the last caller, which is when did the penny drop? If that's not an unfair phrase to use, when did you lose the faith, as it were?
I started listening to this radio show.
Oh dear! Can't blame it on me.
No, but actually, you have been a major influence in my socialist road. Actually.
No wonder they're trying to get me sacked.
But basically, I followed Boris Johnson right from Brexit, and it's all. I voted Brexit, and I'm one of those people that you're going about. I didn't really look into it.
No.
I voted blindly. Since the Brexit, I've listened to everything, and my God, I wish I'd have never done that.
Yeah, but again, I don't like people. You didn't use the word ashamed, but the last caller did. I don't like that. I don't think people should be beating themselves up for having been too busy to question what they were being told by pretty much everybody powerful in the country, or certainly everybody powerful in the media and that wing of the Conservative Party. But it is. Yeah, it is hard to know what the road ahead is going to look like, but you know that the road behind is a road you wish that your party had never gone down.
Yeah. Oh, mate. Yeah.
Nicely put. Kevin, thank you, mate. Take care. You can get back to what you're doing today. You putting a roof on? Is a big job ahead?
This guy He works in all the latest values for ecology and stuff. So
you're putting in all the green business.
Yeah, so we're trying to get his project, bring it in on time because he's got a lot of pressure on him.
Well, good luck to you. I'll tell you what. I'm thinking back to the summer of 1988, Kevin, just down the road from you in Doncaster, when I spent 2 weeks working on a building site. And I tell you what, if camera phones had existed then, mate, I would never, ever, ever live it down.
It still goes off, James, don't worry. So not much has changed.
you take care, honestly. Some of the stuff, it took me like 10 hours to do what it would take one of the proper lads about 10 minutes to do. We've rather lost sight of the yoghurt-smeared toddler, haven't we? James, the mother, says Tilly, who's in Whitby, needs to get a water cannon. I believe London had some. I think we had to scrap them after the guy who gets all the big calls right bought them without realising they were illegal, Tilly. And blast the toddler clean until he can't take it anymore and runs out of the supermarket, preferably into the path of the trolley collector. That's probably what Dominic Cummings is calling himself these days, isn't it? Sarah writes, footballification doesn't work in this case because they'd sack the manager at the first sign of such a downturn in performance. That moment has long gone. I don't know, actually. I think I most recently... I'm not going to name any managers because I don't want to get attacked by football fans, but the idea that we're just about to turn the corner, we're just about to start performing at the level we should be performing at, keeps a lot of managers or a lot of supporters on side for quite a long time. But you're right, there's usually a breaking point. And this one unsigned. Dominic Raab has insisted that the amount of yoghurt is minimal. The mother is doing everything right in trying to move the giant baby, while Jacobs Rees-Mogg states that we need to change the laws on yoghurt availability. If I'd come up with that, I'd have signed it. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Astonishing opening calls on this. We're trying to confine the conversation in the first instance to people who would describe themselves as conservatives. And from a Bridge 4 yesterday evening with a councillor of 22 years, right through to Kevin, who had to step away from the building site upon which he is working, traditional Conservative voters way beyond breaking point now, just almost marvelling the fact that Boris Johnson is still clinging on to power. So do counter those positions if you want to explain why you remain absolutely loyal, despite the fact, as those two callers have pointed out, that the contempt with which he treats standards, forget about voters, the contempt with which he treats standards in the Owen Paterson affair, or in the parties, most obviously, for those two first contributors, make it very hard to understand why anyone is keeping the faith. 10:37 is the time. I have got phone lines free. This only ever happens when I confine contributions to people who fit into the category that we've described today, because I think you're worried I might ambush you or tempt you onto the programme under false pretences and then rip your throat out like a furious frisson bichou. Well, I was about to come up with the name of an exotic dog there. I should have just gone with Shih Tzu. I won't, I promise. I want to hear what your thinking is today, that's all. 0345 6060 973. Elspeth is in Sutton. Elspeth, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Yes, I have a lot to say, really. I think.
Well, take your time, fill your boots. I do.
I think, I do consider myself to have been a lifelong Conservative voter, as were my parents, and grandparents, etc. But, I mean, there is no hope now. There is not a chance in hell of me ever voting for them again, I don't think.
Even after a change of leader?
Well, what do I see around them? I mean, these people on my television screen this morning... going out to the nation, insulting us even more than they've insulted us previously, to tell us that this was an amazing result. How is this an amazing result? 148 people don't want you. And this wasn't a general election.
No.
This was a one-horse race. And
trying to compare it to the last leadership election, claiming his mandate has increased, that was a curious mixture of hilarious and horrifying, wasn't it?
I mean, what a joke. What a joke this man is. What a joke they all are. He's surrounded himself by people who just haven't got a clue. I'm just insulted. I mean, it's just insulting people's intelligence.
What motivates them? I guess in some cases it's pretty clear that they wouldn't ever enjoy this sort of level of advancement under any other Prime Minister. But even that feels a little unkind to attribute it all to selfishness. I suppose what I'm asking, what they see that you can't see. What do you think it does that motivates? So let's pick on James Cleverly today.
Job protection.
Right, yeah.
They're looking after themselves. That's all they're interested in. I mean, I wrote to our MP, who is a I live in a constituency that fluctuates. It's Tory at the moment. It could be Liberal Democrat at any point. It goes back and forth over the years.
Yes.
So he's not in a strong position because he has gone either way previously. And I wrote to him twice. My husband wrote to him. I mean, the response that we got was just one of, I'm really sorry to hear about, you lost people. I lost my job. I worked in the travel industry for over 30 years and I lost my job. But I take that because I think I'm lucky. I'm alive. I'm healthy.
Sure.
And, losing my job,
And that's more a consequence of global pandemic than it is of governmental incompetence, isn't it?
Of course it is. But you put that down to it. But when you think of all the sacrifices that people made and that smug look on that idiot's face, I'm sorry, but...
Sorry, which one are you talking about now, Elspeth?
Well, who do we think?
I don't know. Not Raab or Priti Patel or James Cleverly or Liz Truss or... No, OK, just specifically Johnson.
All of them, actually, but the smug look and the patronising behaviour towards us as if, we haven't got a clear thought in our own heads. I just don't get it. You've lost sight of it. It isn't about your job. It's not about self-protection. It's about doing what's right that has been to hell and back.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back. But do right by us and show us that you're leaders. Anyone can be a manager. Anyone can manage the country. But to lead us. And if that is all we've got to lead us, what we're seeing in that front bench, God help us.
It's not... I sometimes overthink things. I'm really, really enjoying the calls today because it's actually all quite straightforward and simple, isn't it? There are just... You can pick an example of something that breaks the bond between Conservative Party and Conservative voter. And possibly because I'm not traditionally either, I find it fascinating to hear from these ringside seats. It's pretty straightforward where you are and why you're there, isn't it, Elspeth?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the moment, I can't ever see a time again when that is where my cross would go.
Well, I think you will change. I don't know, but I think
so much to pull back, and we can all turn things around. Of course, we can.
Yes.
Turn around the lies, the cheating, the smugness, the condescending, the patronising. We don't need it. What we need is honest people with integrity to stand up and lead the country.
We don't need another hero.
I am sorry. I want to see it. I look for it every day.
Everyone's telling me
and I hope that one day, in the next few months, he's going to show that that's where I can put my cross.
See, I have thoughts about Starmer as well, and I hadn't realised what they were until yesterday. I had the pleasure of interviewing him not long ago for a big full sit-down, which I found incredibly helpful and illuminating. I came out of it with a much higher opinion of him than I had before. I didn't have a low opinion before, but I shared a lot of the fear, the ambivalence that you described. But I saw something yesterday, and I don't know whether this will resonate with you or not. I saw him giving his statement immediately after the result came in. And what I saw was someone who is not very good at university debating. He has his moments at PMQs, but he is not a showman. He is not a kind of a show off, and that's what people want to see. Still, I'm describing myself here. I'm not criticising anybody else. You kind of think, why isn't he landing rhetorical punches? Why isn't he embarking upon wonderful flourishes? That's not what he does. So I think what Starmer needs to do is actually drive home the value, perhaps, of not being somebody who's very good at insults or somebody who gets down and dirty to win university debating things. The Led by Donkeys lads put together an astonishing litany of offence throughout Boris Johnson's entire life, starting with his school days, when his teacher famously said that he honestly seems to think it's churlish of us to expect him to live by the standards that bind the rest of us. And that's so true as well. So Starmer's problem is that he's not a show pony, and he's living in a world where show ponies now have thrived for quite a long time. I don't know. I'm overthinking again. Elspeth, thank you. David is in Chorley. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm a lifelong Conservative voter, but no more. For me, it started with the Cummings fiasco.
The Barnard Castle business. That's when Roger Gale, I'd forgotten that Roger Gale, who's one of the most prominent opponents of Johnson within the party, he sent his letter in after Barnard Castle. So credit to him, where credit is due.
Absolutely. And I wish the rest had the same integrity. But for Boris Johnson, well, in fact, let's start with Reece Smug, as I call him. For him to come on and say it was a victory after he talked about a better result for Theresa May.
I don't know that that's really him. That may not be him. That could still be a satirist. I haven't done the reveal on that yet, David. That might be one of those pesky comedians doing an impression.
There's nobody else that looks as ridiculous as him.
I'll give you that.
So I can't see that. But Boris Johnson then, after using his ignorance of there being parties as his defence for getting it wrong, then says yesterday he would do it again.
I'm glad you've picked up on that, because we haven't mentioned that yet. Reports from the 1922 committee meeting, where he was sort of pleading for his political life. No one's challenged this or contradicted it. He said he would do it all again in the context of the parties that he attended. That's incredible, right? That's incredible.
Absolutely insults our intelligence. It puts another smear, because he's not going to leave a mark. He's going to leave a stain when he leaves.
Blimey.
But for me, he's again insulted all those that lost loved ones by saying he would do it all again. You know, does that mean that if there's another royal that dies the night before, there'll be another big party with people being sick? It's atrocious. It's just horrible.
I sense, David, that you won't be drawing a line under it and moving on.
No, not at all. Well, I am moving on from the Conservative Party, yes. But I'm not sure where my ex is going. I honestly don't know where. I'm going to listen to you, James, and maybe take a punt on where your conversations take people's thoughts.
That's an incredible honour and responsibility that you bestow upon me, and all I can do is promise you that I will take it seriously. But we must point out at 10:46, this is not great listening for the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, either. Although the immediate response will be a degree of satisfaction that so many disaffected Conservatives are so clearly and concisely explaining their reason for abandoning their traditional home. They're not exactly queuing up outside Labour's door either, and that has to be partly the responsibility of the current leader. And the question is, for traditional Conservatives, what do you make of this? How are you processing this remarkable assault upon the integrity and the history of your own party? And then, of course, we'll move on to people whose interest is broader, and it's the national interest that they are concerned about. And it can't be good news, can it? Because I don't know whether you've forgotten this. You've got 2 by-elections on the horizon, and the Privileges Committee investigating whether or not he lied to the House of Commons, which I think for most of us, that investigation, and indeed for his own anti-corruption czar who resigned yesterday, it'd take about 10 seconds to conduct that investigation, wouldn't it, and come back with a unanimous result from pretty much any imaginable jury. A really interesting roundup of front pages, which I referred to at the top of the programme by urging you to have a look at the Sun or the Daily Mail today if you're ever confused by what I mean when I use the phrase client journalism. I should have added in England, because as is often the case with a kind of, I don't know quite whether you'd say a corrupt media, but certainly a dishonest media, they change their story according to the audience that it is aimed at. So here are the front pages from a Scottish newsagent this morning. Boris body blow despite winning confidence vote. Got Borexit done. Clown but not out is the Sun's front page. A million miles away from the nonsense that's been peddled on the English edition's front page. Ditto the Daily Mail, who in Scotland go for Boris clings on, but at what cost? Whereas in England, you get Boris vows I'll bash on. So I just thought that would be quite a helpful illustration again of what I mean. I guess the first casualty of corrupt politics is truth, which is an adaptation of a phrase that's normally applied to war. Thank you. I appreciate I haven't always created an environment into which people who identify as lifelong Conservative voters are necessarily going to feel comfortable, but I do passionately believe, and I use the word passionately advisedly there, I passionately believe in the importance of common ground, something that can upset everybody. A few messages coming in saying, ask these Tories what they did about this and what they did about that. And I get that. I really do. But I can't have the conversations I wanted to have today if I'm going to hit them over the head with their support for everything from the bedroom tax to cuts in universal credit. And also, I will do that on another day. So if I want to get interested, I want to have interesting conversations and respectful conversations with people who come from different places from me politically, then you can't be wheeling out every complaint and grievance under the sun about the track record of the party that they're ringing in to talk about supporting. I will, however, solve this little mystery for you. I asked you earlier in the programme whether you felt this was the real J-Dog or a fake J-Dog.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
Now, by all of those metrics, Boris Johnson has done worse than Theresa May. That was Jacob Rees-Mogg, the real version, talking about Theresa May's vote of no confidence, 6 months after which she gave up the ghost as leader of the Conservative Party. And I wasn't sure today whether to go in on Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nadine Dorries, because Nadine Dorries, in a very unhinged attack upon Jeremy Hunt, yes, a former Foreign Secretary in the same party as Nadine Dorries, she essentially said that the Tories were utterly ill-prepared after 9 years of Tory rule. When would we date 3 years ago the pandemic really kicked in? Well, anyway, after about 9 years, the best part of a decade of Tory rule, Nadine Dorries thought that she would score points over Jeremy Hunt by saying that the Tories had left the country completely ill-equipped and ill-prepared to cope with the pandemic. Just pause and think about that. That is the calibre of our cabinet now. Somebody who's attacking a colleague and thinks that it is a zinger or a win to publicly state that after 9 years of government by her own party, the country had been rendered utterly ill-equipped to cope with the onset of a global pandemic. I may even read you that thread. I shared it with you yesterday, but the mind actually boggles at how... And you don't know whether she was allowed to do that or whether it was approved from above. The fact that it's a four-tweet thread with no spelling mistakes suggests to me that she probably did have some help with it, but I don't know. We'll have a look at that a little bit later. But as I suggested to you yesterday, I think there's a danger of taking one or two senior Tories as being evidence of anything bigger, because the put this politely, that there is a level of eccentricity among some of them that means they're probably not helping us come to any or better understanding of bigger issues. And there is, of course, a danger that Jacob Rees-Mogg fits into that category as well. But I think that the simple comparison of what happened to Boris Johnson yesterday with Jacob Rees-Mogg's analysis of what happened to Theresa May when he led an attempted coup against her leads us to a question that everybody can answer, regardless of where you sit politically or ideologically or even geographically, because he's made some mealy-mouthed attempt to disown this statement, but I don't remember him doing so right up until the point that Boris Johnson suffered an even worse drubbing in a confidence vote than Theresa May. So listen again to what Jacob Rees-Mogg said about Theresa May, and then let's just talk about him. Let's talk about him as an emblem of this particular breed of cabinet minister or senior Conservative. I can't remember whether he's still in the cabinet or not as Minister for Brexit Opportunities. How can they do this? How can he stand up in public and describe Theresa May's experiences in the way that you're about to hear, and then, what is it, not even 2 years later, it is nearly 3 years later, describe Boris Johnson's worse performance as being some sort of glorious victory? That is a question that is a bit like questions that we've asked before, but it's not a question we've specifically asked before because this only happened yesterday. So he is and I think he's a useful figure to use at this point, because he has managed to accrue a following of people who think, and I say this with love and affection, people who think that because he sounds so posh, he must be clever. People who mistake education for intelligence and think that when somebody uses Latin words or long words, they must therefore be possessed of a brain, a big brain. And what breaks my heart on a political and an emotional level is that an awful lot of the people who doff their caps and tug their forelocks at Jacob Rees-Mogg are categorically cleverer than he is, but they will never believe that of themselves, because I don't want to say anything that might cast even a vague shadow over the celebrations of the Jubilee at the weekend, but the way the class system is structured in this country means that you have to believe you can only sustain the status quo if people in the lower orders genuinely believe that the people in the upper orders are better than them by some unknowable metric. They are better than them. That's not for the likes of us. That sort of status is not for the likes of us. Altogether now, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. So Jacob Rees-Mogg fascinates me because he is quite stupid. And yet people think that he is knowledgeable or intelligent because he talks so poshly. I mean, the one encounter I've had with him is incredible now in retrospect, given the utter nonsense that he was spouting without either expecting challenge or even apparently acknowledging reality. But forget about that and focus on this. You have one man who's a member of one party, okay, talking about two leaders. Leader number one suffers a humiliation in a vote of no confidence, but wins. And he describes it in the terms you're about to hear. Leader number two suffers a worse humiliation. This is the crucial point. A worse humiliation in a vote of no confidence. And the same man, the same Jacob Rees-Mogg, insists that it is some sort of resounding victory and an enhancement of a mandate. I just want you to talk to me. I don't know how long this will last. I'm inviting you to engage in a little bit of amateur psychology. It might only entertain us until 10:30, or it might go off like a Catherine wheel. I genuinely don't know, because I can't begin to imagine how somebody like this sleeps at night. How we have it on the record. We have a tape of the man describing a humiliation that we might give a 7 out of 10 in apocalyptic terms. When his man then has a humiliation that we will call a 9 out of 10, he tries to paint it as a positive. Just talk me through that. You can be as crass or as clever as you want, all right? Because I don't get that. I look at Boris Johnson and I see precisely nothing that would explain how even the most sycophantic man in the land of sycophants could still be debasing themselves on Boris Johnson's behalf in this way. So here is what he said about Theresa May's 7 out of 10 vote of confidence humiliation.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
Now, all of that is true and then some about Boris Johnson's vote of confidence yesterday. So just talk me through how he can be so completely dissembling and disingenuous, because I don't get it. I'm going to open up the phone lines now. It's a bit of a weird one, but it's an important one. 0345 6060 973. I can't let you libel him or anything like that, but I can certainly let you sail pretty close to the wind in a description of how someone, stroke anyone, can describe circumstances that are less bad than the ones he's now describing as positives in such a negative and condemning way. Okay, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's coming up to 13 minutes after 11. I'm going to find you a useful clip now of him describing yesterday's vote as opposed to the one that Theresa May endured after Jacob Rees-Mogg led an attempted coup against her, and I'll play you that shortly. I'll have that ready for you in just a minute, maybe even before we take the next break. You have to sort of collar him on a doorstep or something like that. They sent Dominic Raab round to humiliate himself in the television and radio studios this morning, but I cannot begin to understand. I mean, is it misogyny? Is it simple sexism? Does he subscribe to a school of thought that thinks because Theresa May was a woman, then when she has a 7 out of 10 humiliation, it's somehow worse than when a man has a 9 out of 10 humiliation? Is it about Brexit? Is it because Theresa May saw the madness of Brexit, but then very loyally and dutifully decided that she had to take the job of introducing it in as least damaging a way as possible, and therefore Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks that a 7 out of 10 humiliation for a Remainer is somehow worse than a 9 out of 10 humiliation for a Leaver? And he's not even, as many Conservatives are telling me now, he's not even a proper Leaver. The worse Brexit goes, the more people will claim that Boris Johnson has betrayed them by not delivering the mythical land of unicorns that they were certain was both on the agenda and something that they can vote for. So it's coming out to 11:15. Just talk me through that. I say it again, it's a weird question. It's not one I would normally go for, but these are very, very weird times. How can one man, one politician, do this yesterday?
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business. Cabinet this morning, there's a lot to be done. But it was a good result for the Prime Minister. He won, and he won by more than the one I had said was enough. Having said this about a less damaging
result for a previous Prime Minister.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
And all right, just as a little bit of self-indulgence, if you are of the view that Jacob Rees-Mogg is a stand-up guy who can be trusted and you know, constantly runs rings around lefties and woke mobs, how do you lie straight in bed tonight? He's your man, right? If you're still tugging your forelock, give me a quick call and tell me what on earth you're tugging your forelock at. So I let me introduce the word doublethink into proceedings. It'll save you tuppence. Doublethink is a process of indoctrination in which subjects are expected to simultaneously accept two conflicting beliefs as truth, often at odds with their own memory or sense of reality. Doublethink is related to, but different from, hypocrisy. That, of course, is a brief précis of the word's use in George Orwell's famous 1984. Here is doublethink in glorious technicolor, live on your televisions in the course of the last 4 years. Doublethink like you have never seen doublethink before, coming from the mouth of a man who some people in this country still believe to be worthy of respect or a role in government. And in that number, Boris Johnson at least subscribes to the second bit. He thinks he's worthy of a role in government. I speak, of course, of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Here he is talking about Theresa May's victory in a vote of no confidence ballot in the Conservative Party, which went better for her than yesterday's went for Boris Johnson. So a little shorter version for you.
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now...
No, that was the wrong one. This is him talking about Theresa May.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And here he is talking about Boris Johnson.
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business. Cabinet this morning, there's a lot to be done. But it was a good result for the Prime Minister. He won, and he won by more than the one I had said was enough.
We'll have to do that again, Keith, for the clips at some point in the next hour, because we don't want the mistake going out on the clips. 20 minutes after 11. So just talk me through how Jacob Rees-Mogg can do that. That's all I want to know, in your view. And you can say it as a supporter or as a detractor, although obviously if you're a supporter, then there'll be a couple of other questions that I'll have to throw into the mix as well. Beth's in Buckhurst Hill. Beth, what do you reckon?
I reckon that this is a really good question. It's a question I've been asking myself a long time, actually.
Good.
I reckon that he has to keep Boris Johnson on side because no other self-respecting Prime Minister would have him in Cabinet. After all the gaffes he's made with the Grenfell Tower comments and stupid things like that and all the toffee-nosed, narcissistic, nasty stuff that he does and says, he knows that if any other Prime Minister came in, he'd be gone.
But he doesn't have to. I mean, it's the knowledge that he's contradicting himself, making himself...
He doesn't care.
Well, he must care. He must care. I mean, how could you not care?
But how could Boris Johnson say and do the stupid things he does and think that we don't notice? None of them, as long as they have the power, as long as they are in the position that they want to be in, as long as they get what they think they want or need or deserve, anything goes. And they could not care less about the rest of us in the process. They will trample on us, they will lie to us, they will do whatever they can to keep their power.
And we're talking about a curious melange of status and self-image here, because he doesn't need the money, but he needs the sense of self. He needs evidence that he's not the man that in his darkest thoughts he thinks he is. And if he can sustain these
discernible skills, other than being a toffee-nosed what's-it that looks down on everyone.
No, he made a ton of money in the city, I think, doing investments and things like that. That is clearly a discernible skill of sorts, however you want to cut or dice it. Admittedly, it's a path that seems to be a heck of a lot easier to pursue if you're the son of a lord who went to Eton than it would be if you were the son of a docker who didn't. But we'll leave that observation for another day.
He doesn't seem to be able to engage brain and show any kind of compassion or empathy or common sense.
But when he's in church on Sunday, or when he's in confession, and I speak as a fellow Catholic, so I know the rubric and things like that. How does he square his conscience with the knowledge that what he said about Theresa May and what he said about Boris Johnson render him, at the very least, profoundly dishonest, and at the very worst, almost treacherous from the point of the national interest?
But you could ask that of very many Christians.
Yeah, but I'm asking you about him.
Oh,
how does he do it? Does he just close his conscience? Does he turn his inner voice off? Does he just literally pretend it never happened? How do you do it? How do you get through it?
I think because the reason that you and I asked that question is why we're not in politics.
Maybe
because we couldn't, but he can.
There's plenty of politicians who couldn't on both sides of the House. I genuinely believe that. In fact, there's 148 in the Tory party. We know that there are. We may not know who they all are, but we know that there are. And I guess I wonder whether we know people like this in other walks of life. I've never come across it. I must have done. I'm not thinking hard enough. I must have come across it. It's like that line in Richard III, I can smile and murder when I smile. It's utterly detached from the normal standards, the normal rules. What was it that the teacher said about Johnson? I honestly believe he thinks it's churlish of us to expect him to abide by the rules that bind the rest of us. And I guess Rees-Mogg isn't necessarily like that. I can't imagine him being a rule breaker at school, but he is almost enthralled to the bully, to the rebel. And therefore, this is all his dreams come true, having a role in Boris Johnson's government. I don't know. From Beth to Becky, from Buckhurst Hill to Kenilworth. Becky, what do you think?
Hiya. Just on the comment you made earlier about is what Jacob Rees-Mogg saying is that does it have a misogynistic element?
Yeah.
And so I think there is a gendered element to it because when women are perceived to fail, it is seen as a much bigger deal than when men fail. And obviously there was a big difference between the amount of no confidence votes that Theresa May got versus Boris. And so I think when women don't succeed, they're sort of more punished for it. Whereas with Boris, he got a huge amount of no confidence votes, but it just seems like it's going to be business as normal. So I think there is a gendered element to what he was saying.
What if it was? If it was a woman that Rees-Mogg liked, then this wouldn't necessarily apply, or a woman that I guess I'm interested in whether you think Jacob Rees-Mogg would be capable of such moral corruption in servitude to a woman. If it was Margaret Thatcher, for example, I bet he could have done this, couldn't he?
Yeah, I think it sort of ties in with what was the goal at the time. Clearly, at the time, Theresa May wasn't doing the job as he saw fit. So maybe that's why he saw it as maybe that's why he was going so extreme with it's an utter failure. She needs to be gone, kind of thing. Whereas with Boris, in his mind, has sort of gotten the work done of quote unquote getting Brexit done. Then maybe he's more.
So the truth doesn't matter at all then to someone like Rees-Mogg. Once the cultishness of Brexit has polluted him, if there was anything pure there in the first place to be polluted, then once the cultishness of Brexit has polluted his conscience, the truth ceases to matter, and all that matters is service to the cult, whether it's the cult leader or the cult ideology, the Brexit.
Yeah, and until fun, and I'm sure if that clip was brought up to him, he would find some way of spinning it.
I think he has. He said something like, lots of people told me this was wrong and I now agree with them, but he neglected to mention that at any point prior to yesterday. Bless him.
Again, it's all in service of, what is the goal, and just the sort of, the phrase, reject everything you've seen before, even if it completely contradicts what I'm doing now.
It is breathtaking, and we're talking about it so calmly, all of us, you and Beth and me, and bunch of texters coming in, filling Sid Cup up next. I can't believe we're talking so calmly. In fact, I'm going to hit you over the heads with the clip again. So here he is. I need to get the percentages in front of me. So here he is talking about Theresa May receiving 117 votes of no confidence.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And here he is talking about Boris Johnson receiving 148 votes of no confidence.
Good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business.
Come on, even if you despise every fibre of my being and you only listen as a form of penance, how can you let anybody get away with this? Phil's in Sidcup. Phil, what do you reckon?
Oh, just the utter lunacy, James, isn't it? It's, but I don't think it's misogynistic. I think it's, again, it's all psychology. It's tribalism. It's the Brexit bit. It's certainly he sees.
But there's no one else. There's loads of people who are welded to Brexit. There's loads of people who still bend the knee to Boris Johnson, and none of them would be so crass, so pathetic as that, would they?
I don't know. It's the old school Etonian thing as well, isn't it?
Rory Stewart went to Eton. I'm going to have to defend some of my old pals who went to Eton College at this occasion, because they're not all built like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson.
Rory Stewart has a cognitive function, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's the thing
and
that
a
sets
conscience.
him apart from. And a conscience, yeah. I mean, Rees-Mogg is just... I don't know. But the funny thing is, James, just quickly, is that I probably was one of those people that listened to Rees-Mogg and because of his posh voice and accent thought he was knowledgeable, and now obviously you strip it apart and you realise just what an utter...
How long would he have lasted if he sounded like Danny Dyer, Phil?
Oh, no, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know where you go with this. I mean, James, it's just stupidity of the heart. I mean, I don't... But the thing is I still know people that will still back Rees-Mogg as much as they'll back Johnson, and they're relatively educated people. I don't know, it's this sunk cost fallacy, this thing that, you know... I don't know, with the confirmation, you know, you're so wedded to an idea that you know, that cognitive dissonance you get, that you can't, you know, you've got a best friend but has committed a heinous crime, but how do you back him still or do you not? And it's that, you know, that deliberation and what do you do and what's the best, it must really hurt you sort of thing either way, I guess. I don't know.
It damages your sense of self, I suppose, to admit the truth, because you then become flawed and vulnerable and fallible and all of those things, and none of us want to feel that way.
Exactly.
Thank you, Phil. It is a mystery. I don't know if any... I mean, can you be a reformed sociopath? Can anybody ring us and tell us that they used to be like this and they would once have... Because it very rarely lands quite so completely. They're normally... Johnson, I think, is clever enough never to actually make it so blatant, never to make it so clear. And then Rees-Mogg not bright enough to come up with a choice of words that would have allowed him to avoid this level of humiliation, to be describing two separate events in two completely contradictory ways, despite the fact that the event he described in glowing terms was measurably worse than the event he described in castigating terms. I in a million years possibly won't be able to get my head around this, but we'll try for at least another half an hour. Just to give Jacob Rees-Mogg a brief break from our scrutiny, here is an MP called Bob Seeley. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the MP for the Isle of Wight. He's just written this to his constituents. I voted that I had confidence in the Prime Minister as leader of the Conservative Party, although not without some consideration and only after discussion with senior ministers. It is clear that some foolish errors were made during Partygate. Boris has apologised. I hope now that he can focus on governing. I talked again with ministers about why a fair funding package has not yet been forthcoming for the Isle of Wight Council. I have been assured that they will look at this again and will do so in the very near future. So, there you go. I mean, you're not supposed to tell people that you've been bribed, and not even bribed with a cheque, but bribed with a promise of a cheque, Bob. I don't know, I mean, is this yet more evidence of how the fish rots from the head down? You're not supposed to tell us this bit, Bob, are you? Remarkable. And speaking of other MPs, just to give J-Dog a brief respite from our scrutiny of his epic dishonesty and dissembling, here is everybody's favourite food bank fan, Lee Anderson, MP. Well, just have a little listen.
It's as simple as that. People don't look at the Prime Minister's character and think he's a man who's lied to the Queen, lied to the House of Commons, lied to the public, and they don't trust him anymore.
What people see, Geeta, is a witch hunt led by the BBC, led by the Labour Party and the mainstream.
It's the Conservative MPs who voted, not any of the media.
Had it in for Boris from day one. It's been a massive witch hunt. It's about time he got off his back. Let him crack on with running the country. Come back and talk to me in 2 years' time when he's delivered on his promises, and then we'll see where we are.
There is no witch hunt, I can assure you, from
there is a witch
BBC
hunt.
or any
my inbox is full of people complaining about the BBC all the time, saying it should be defunded. It's a massive witch hunt by you and the Labour Party and the mainstream media. You're on his case all the time. Even now, you don't want to let this drop, are you? You're going to go on and on and on.
Well, it's not about letting us drop, and it is not a witch hunt by anyone in the press. Our job is to ask questions of all politicians, which is what we do, regardless of party.
I don't know if Lee Anderson actually has a brain cell to call his own. I've never, ever... I mean, I'm talking... And it's funny, isn't it? Because we talk about accents, and I wonder how Jacob Rees-Mogg would have fared if he'd had an accent like Lee Anderson's. But they are peas in a pod. They are just spectacularly stupid. Dominic Raab tried it on with another BBC journalist yesterday, attempting to claim that there was some sort of bias, some sort of partisanship. But Lee Anderson there claiming that 148 Conservative MPs expressing a lack of confidence in Boris Johnson is somehow the consequence of a BBC witch hunt. I've got a pretty good vocabulary. I hope you don't think that that's an arrogant thing for me to say. And in fact, sometimes I lean towards the sesquipedalian in my pursuit of excessively long words. But I don't think there's a word that quite fits that level of thickness from Lee Anderson. I mean, and this is our body politic. This is our parliament. That's absolutely incredible. For 148 Tory MPs have lost confidence in Boris Johnson because of a BBC witch hunt, and because his inbox is full of rubbish from racists, he somehow thinks that that is true. I'll tell you what, if 100 of us send Lee Anderson an email saying that the moon is made of cheese, and it's only because of a BBC witch hunt that everyone keeps pretending it's made of moon, do you think he'll go on the telly and say that everybody knows the moon is actually made of cheese and it's all the consequence of a BBC witch hunt, that everybody keeps insisting that moon is made of moon? And don't listen to a word that Neil Armstrong bloke says either, because he's part of the witch hunt as well. And it is absolutely breathtaking. And speaking about that biased media, here's the best-selling newspaper in the country. Boris vows, I'll bash on. Here is the second best-selling newspaper in the country. Night of the Blonde Knife, stabbed him back by 148 Tories. Damn that biased media, honestly. And the BBC asking simple questions about how 148 Conservative MPs could have lost confidence in a Conservative Prime Minister, only to be told that it's a consequence of a Labour and BBC-led witch hunt. Oh, Lee Anderson, Lee Anderson, Lee Anderson. 11:38 is the time. Shall we summon the Usherwood? I think we probably should. We haven't heard from Theo Usherwood today. These are days of political intrigue, so who better to join us than, well, summon the Usherwood, please. Hello.
Hello, James. Just very quickly on the Bob Seeley question, the point that you made just now. When I bumped into him yesterday, about 11 o'clock yesterday morning, I did ask him which way he was going to vote, and he said at that point he hadn't made up his mind. So one would presume that the meeting with ministers about this funding for the Isle of Wight took place after that point, at which point he decided that actually he was going to support the Prime Minister. But the point, of course, he's making to his constituents on the Isle of Wight is, look what leverage I've managed to use to secure you more money for the council.
Well, let's just, not to split hairs, me old fruit, but he's secured a promise of more money from Boris Johnson's closest allies.
Yes.
Yes, a promise. I'll say those words again for anyone in the Isle of Wight listening to this. He's secured a promise from Boris Johnson's closest allies. Let's just remind ourselves of one of Boris Johnson's closest allies. No, I'll do it again. We've played those clips enough. To what do we owe this pleasure, Theo Usher?
Well, as well as Lee Anderson speaking this morning to defend the Prime Minister, another MP loyal to the PM has been speaking. He spoke to me, in fact. He's called Jacob Young. He's the MP for Redcar.
Redcar, isn't it? Yes.
Redcar. And I asked Mr. Young what persuaded him to support the Prime Minister in yesterday's vote of confidence.
He explained that he felt as though the cost of living on families was too high. Yeah. We need to get down the cost of housing, we need to get down the cost of energy, but crucially we also need to get down the cost of taxation. That's his focus, and that's a...
So that's what you'd like to see, tax cuts?
Well, as I said, that's what the Prime Minister outlined in the 22 yesterday, and I support his agenda.
But do you recognise that the tax burden's the highest since World War II under the Conservatives?
Well, that's what you're telling me, but as you say, the Prime Minister said yesterday, one of the biggest costs for households is taxation. He wants to see that reduced, and I support him in trying to do that.
But him and Rishi Sunak have put it up to levels never seen under Tony Blair or Gordon Brown.
Yeah, well, I mean, Theo, we've had a pandemic. We spent £407 billion. Where do you think that money's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, true, but then you want tax cuts.
Well, exactly. But it's about how you manage that process, bringing down the cost of living for families, helping ensure that those who can afford to pay more, carry the heaviest burden, and those who can't, that we support them through that.
So we all slightly rushed there, James, because we were walking through College Green back to Westminster. That's why I was both slightly breathless from Mr. Young and from myself.
Did you? I mean, there were two things. Right. Not that you need any guidance from me, but I think it would have been nice to give the old airing to the line. That's not an opinion; it's just counting. But also,
I did say facts.
I know. I'm teasing you. But when he used the word exactly, are we sure he knows what the word exactly means?
So you usually say exactly when somebody makes a point. You go, exactly, you're right.
Yes.
But he did it the other way around, didn't he?
I think he did. Yes. I'm not even going to try and pronounce exactly backwards, but I think that's kind of what
so
he
said
did.
Exactly my point when he was saying exactly his point.
Yes.
So it wasn't really exactly, it was the opposite of exactly.
What is the opposite of exactly? Not remotely.
Yeah, exactly. He should have said not remotely. You're talking, that's not correct. That's not remotely what I'm saying.
What has happened? I don't know how many of them you've had to speak to today, but what's happened to all the delivering for the British people?
I haven't managed to find. Do
you know what I wanted to do yesterday? I forgot to tell you. I don't know if you fancy this, but I've got the crib sheet still. I've got yesterday's ludicrous hymn sheet in front of me, and I thought we could do some role playing where I would be the Conservative MP using the hymn sheet, and you would be political Rottweiler Theo Ushwood's LBC political editor asking me questions, and I would see whether I could perform a little bit better than. Well, it wouldn't be hard, but a little bit better than, for example, Jacob Young just did with you there.
Okay.
It's rather sonorous.
So I will say, I'll ask you, James.
Yeah.
What persuaded you to vote for the Prime Minister?
Well, Theo, we secured the biggest majority since 1987 and secured the highest share of the vote, 43.6% of any party since 1979, winning 14 million votes.
That's not correct.
What?
14 million votes. Oh, what, back in 29? No, but last night.
Yeah. Well, this is typical of the sort of LBC witch hunt that people like you go on when you're dealing with the simple facts about Boris Johnson's basic brilliance. You're probably friends with that James O'Brien bloke, aren't you?
Never heard of him.
Go on, give me one more.
Okay. What does the Prime Minister need to do over the next 2 years to secure a victory in the next election?
Well, I think we all know that the Prime Minister needs to deliver for the British people, and also he needs to deliver for the British people while, and this I think is the crucial point, Theo, that a lot of his detractors at the BBC and the woke mob are missing. He also needs to deliver for the British people while delivering for the British people, Theo.
I've got a final question. What's he going to deliver?
Exactly. Theo Ushwood live from College Green. A little bit of help there from my colleague Keith, just in case you heard it bleed out of my earphones. I wouldn't want to deny credit where credit is due. It's amazing, isn't it? And these two clips here of Jacob Rees-Mogg are absolutely shaming. And I mean what I say about vocabulary. I row back from using some of the really strong words. Because I know that something worse is going to happen a week down the line or a month down the line, and I'll have used up the strong word already. So what word have I got to describe the new thing that's happened? For example, thick, in the context of Lee Anderson. Or Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's not big enough anymore to describe... Or dishonest in the case of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Dissembling, contradictory, doublethink. Orwell had to invent his own words to describe the level of moral corruption now being displayed by Jacob Rees-Mogg. He actually had to invent new words to describe what was happening in front of his eyes. And so he invented the word doublethink to describe exactly what Jacob Rees-Mogg was doing yesterday on national television. I mean, the mind truly boggles. I would love to speak to you if your mind is not boggling and that you actually can make some sort of sense of this, or tell me why you still, as an earlier caller suggested, you still think he's deserving of your respect or your support after he I mean, he's not even pretending to tell the truth anymore. I mean, the more I think... I do this every day, as you know, and I'm not exactly a fully paid-up member of the Jacob Rees-Mogg fan club, as you also know. I knew he was talking through his hat when he sold you Brexit, but I feel appalled on your behalf for the fact that him and his ilk managed to mislead so many of my fellow countrymen and women. So it's a very generous dislike that I have developed for him and his fellow liars. But even I'm stunned today by the scale of this dissembling. I'll just remind you again what he had to say when Theresa May received 117 votes of no confidence as Conservative leader.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And what he had to say when Boris Johnson received 148.
Good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business.
The mind boggles. It truly does. 10 to 12 is the time. Tim's in Ilkeston. That is where Robert Lindsay is from, isn't it?
Hi, James. Can I say the first time caller?
Well, I shouldn't have misled you like that, because I just did a little name drop at the top of the call there, because Robert Lindsay's from Ilkeston, isn't he, the actor?
Sorry, the line's gone a bit crackly.
I think it's because I'm talking gibberish and you don't quite understand what's happened because you come on to talk about politics and I'm name-dropping one of my favourite actors into the conversation just because he comes from the town that you're calling me from.
Yes,
So we'll park that and start again. Tim's in Ilkeston. That's where Robert Lindsay comes from, I believe, but
Hello.
Let's not talk about that now. Tim, what's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to just give a reply to your comment earlier about Rees-Mogg and not being a rule breaker, sort of being a bit of a sort of stickler for the rules. And I just feel that
I was thinking about him at school chiefly when I said that. I can't imagine that he caused much. I can't imagine that he caused many problems for the teachers at school.
No, and even that, but I think where it's a rule with some kind of, penalty, then certainly he's like a sort of rules bloke.
So fear of punishment.
I think where he can make it more murky, where it's more sort of moral, I think he's able to be more flexible, and he feels that he really is different to the rest of us, that there are certain rules that don't apply to us. I was thinking, actually, one way of looking at it, I don't even remember seeing, you should remember the Bodyline series,
Douglas Jardine
series on Australia. In the 1920s, 30s. Yeah. And one of the one of the sort of reasons why people were so aghast at the tactics used was that it was within the rules, but it was like sort of playing around with the rules a little bit.
Yes. So they were technically right, but the traditions and expectations and standards were being destroyed.
There's a place where he's happy to be technically correct, but also, he's happy that sort of there's a moral ambiguity.
But I think you're right, looking back at his career, but on this occasion, that doesn't work. That's not a get-out-of-jail-free card, because he has described a measurably worse performance by Boris Johnson in glowing terms.
He is quite capable in his head of being able to defend what he said about Theresa May and what he said about Boris Johnson. And I think part of that is background and breeding. He is so very different. Part of it is his education. So practiced in being able to defend, all kinds of positions. Boris Johnson wrote those 2 different letters about Brexit.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder.
You can imagine Rees-Mogg doing exactly the same thing. You know, he has this innate moral flexibility in him.
Very generous way of putting it. An innate moral flexibility almost sounds like an attribute, Tim. I know exactly what you mean by it.
Yeah. You know, he sort of he's quite capable of having multiple positions on one thing and being able to sort of choose whichever one is to the best of his advantage.
And the truth be damned is the brutal conclusion that we have to arrive at. And I think you've proved why Orwell, because like me, it's almost like we can't find the words that we need to describe innate moral flexibility as a thing of beauty. But doublethink is what Orwell had to call it. He had to invent a new word to describe this level of dissembling in politics. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Tim, thank you. And I apologise for ambushing you with a complete non sequitur at the top of this call to the programme. If I'd known it was your first time, I wouldn't have done that. I do apologise.
You're welcome.
There you go. And I only did it so I could plug the last episode of Full Disclosure with Robert Lindsay, who, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, is from Ilkeston in Derbyshire. It's just like Tim, the last caller. It's 5 to 12. Darius is in Manchester. Darius, what do you reckon?
Well, I heard we were talking a lot about witch hunts, but to my mind, the cabinet is sort of a necromancer cabal brewing up trouble in a cauldron for the rest of the population.
Yes, I'm chuckling at your choice of words, not at the picture you're painting, because I think that's worryingly accurate.
Yeah. Right, going back to Mogg, Mr. Mogg, sir.
Yes.
The first clip when he was talking about May, the main thing that Mogg was thinking about, although I would have thought sort of innately...
Oh, I think it clicked out then. I just heard it go. I don't know what happened there. We'll try and get him back up. So Joe's in Swanage in Dorset. Joe, what do you reckon?
So yesterday I watched quite a bit of TV and I was quite surprised by how non-committal Jacob Rees-Mogg was on what he thought the result was going to be. So with public opinion and with the Jubilee and whatnot, I think that Jacob Rees-Mogg thought that Boris Johnson would do a lot worse yesterday than he actually did.
No, I disagree.
And you disagree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I know that behind the scenes they were talking about between 100 to 130 and hoping that it would be at the lower end of that with a slim chance of it coming in double figures, and that would have been something they could claim as a win. No one really, until Nadine Dorries launched that astonishing attack upon her own party and its preparedness for the pandemic in an attempt to throw Jeremy Hunt under a bus. I don't think anyone was estimating it being over 130 by then, never mind 148.
So my thing is I'm just trying to come up with a logical way.
Yes, of course. You're doing the Sherlock Holmes thing. You're trying to eliminate the impossible.
I'm trying to come up with a logical way of you saying, what a result, that was a result, and that's the only way that I can think of.
Oh, but you're just a nice bloke, you see. You're not capable. Go on.
Yeah, if that's not true, if that is not true, then I mean, it's Jacob Rees-Mogg, right? We're talking about Boris Johnson. So, for example, when Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was terrible for Theresa May, back then there were the rules of the game. If you got X number of votes of no confidence, it was a terrible result, and Theresa May has gone. For the last 2-3 years, since Boris Johnson
the rules have been broken.
The rule books have been, so it's almost irrelevant what should happen.
All the traditional metrics have been torched. I think you're absolutely right, but I admire your decency of spirit, actually, to be looking for a plausible reason that doesn't portray Jacob Rees-Mogg as the duplicitous little shill that he clearly or arguably has revealed himself to be. Thank you, Joe. I'm only cracking on because poor old Darius got cut off in his prime and I want to give him a minute to make his point. What's it going to be, Darius?
Right, as quick as this. The first interview when Mogg was talking about May, he's living in his now moment, which was then.
Yes,
okay?
Yes.
He doesn't realise that things that have come from the past can affect the future, i.e. a recording of what he said then, which was his now.
Yeah.
So now he can come out with this claptrap about how, well, Boris won the confidence vote.
It's done brilliantly.
And he's forgotten about what happened before. But again, all he's thinking about is the now. if the guy had another brain, he'd be a half-wit because he just doesn't realise what's happening. And this now situation, I am in the now, it's just, it goes back to time. I think goes back to Neanderthals, I think.
Is it right? So it's like your lizard brain kicking in, where you only deal with what's immediately in front of you, and that becomes the sort of obsession with getting through one news cycle that Boris Johnson has now infected, in a sense, the entire party. But it doesn't matter what you said yesterday, never mind what you said 3 or 4 years ago, even if it completely contradicts what you're saying today. Just focus on what I'm saying today. Don't look over there, look over here, look over here, look into my eyes, I can't do that on the radio, it's against the rules, in case I accidentally hypnotise you. That'd be fun, though, wouldn't it? It's just gone 12 noon. I'll be a little bit late for the news, after which I don't want to move on. Do you mind? I mean, we'll find another question focusing upon the current political landscape. Who feels excluded from the programme so far? If you haven't had an opportunity to join in, drop me a text or a tweet during the news bulletin, and I'll try and come up with a question after the news bulletin that allows you to take up a seat at this table. I think I'm thinking back to the Ludicrous Lee, that's what we'll call him, Ludicrous Lee Anderson. It makes him sound like an all-in wrestler, doesn't it? Ludicrous Lee Anderson describing the vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister as being a consequence of a witch hunt led by the BBC and the Labour Party. Quite incredible. But I suspect these days that the Conservative politician whose name appears most in my inbox is the former MP, Rory Stewart. And, of course, it's not that long ago. He was a leadership contender with, I think, a much better chance than many people realise of actually getting over the line against Boris Johnson. Certainly Boris Johnson supporters were worried enough to lend some of their votes to Jeremy Hunt in the penultimate ballot so that Rory Stewart would not go up against Boris Johnson in the final round. And when you see that there were 148 MPs prepared to vote against Boris Johnson yesterday, you perhaps get an indication of why that Machiavellian machination was undertaken by his by Johnson's leadership campaign. And I'm delighted to tell you that Rory joins us now on the line. Rory, it's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
How did you... just give us a quick flavour of the historical significance of this as a student of politics, but also, of course, as a Conservative politician. The numbers are being downplayed by the usual suspects. What's your overview of last night's event?
The numbers are huge. In fact, as you'll know, they were briefing out yesterday to almost anyone who'd listened that they thought that they'd be in trouble if they got to 130, which meant that really they thought they could keep it below 100. This is catastrophic for them because this is worse than what happened to Theresa May shortly before she was toppled. And the way to look at it is that there are basically 170 MPs voting for Boris Johnson who are either ministers or on the payroll in one way or another. So 3/4 of his backbenchers have voted against him. 3/4 of the people who are free to vote against him have voted against him. That is a very, very bad situation. It's particularly strange because, as you know, he's only just over 2 years into office, apparently with a very large majority. So he's done something unprecedented. I mean, Theresa May was toppled in this way when she basically lost an election. But for this to happen to him at this scale now is extraordinary.
Were you surprised, personally?
No. I was surprised by how many managed to come out against him.
That's what I mean, yes.
Pleasantly surprised by that, yes.
Do you have back channels? I mean, you must be still in touch with some former colleagues.
Yeah. No, I speak to lots of colleagues, and many of them had reached out to me, and many of them are completely appalled and horrified. They're horrified not just that he's hanging on, but they're horrified about the way he's conducting himself, the fact that he seems to be behaving as though it's business as usual. But I was still surprised by how many people voted against him because there is huge pressure put on by the whips. He will have personally written to every single person. He will have promised jobs to lots of people. I remember this when I was, when he reached out to me in 2016 when he was running for leadership against Theresa May. He's got a lovely way of doing it. He said to me, Rory, I don't believe anything that I'm about to say to you. Don't believe a word, but I'd love to have you in my cabinet. And he would have been doing that to I guess, about 300 people. So the fact that 148 of them held out shows just how deeply unpopular he is, because there are strong forces of loyalty which will have prevented many others from turning against him.
There is a danger, and I don't know if we're engaging in it now, of analysing this through the lens of normality, of analysing this according to traditional trends, according to traditional relationships between actions and consequences, according to what has always gone before. And you, as much as anybody, know that we're in an era now and under an administration now that bears no resemblance whatsoever to what has gone before. So is there any case for arguing that however wounded he may be, he will stagger on regardless?
I think it's very likely he'll try to stagger on, and it's very much in his character. And he ignores all types of conventions. You see, the one he's done most dramatically recently is because he's under pressure to resign for breaking the ministerial code and lying in Parliament. He's tried to change the ministerial code so that you no longer have to resign. So he does this kind of stuff all the time. I think, though, he is very badly wounded. And if the Conservative Party make the mistake of leaving him in power, he will take them into an election that he will lose. And he will hand the country over to, probably at the moment, it looks like a coalition between Labour and maybe the SNP. But in any case, people in the Conservative Party backing him will be deeply, deeply regretting this. I mean, in every way, because they must be going home to their families. Their partners must be saying to them, you're crazy. Their constituents are saying they're crazy. It's becoming a sort of weird personality cult.
I thought Jesse Norman's intervention yesterday was particularly interesting. While all of the loyalists were trumpeting the vaccine rollout as a success, Kate Bingham's husband resigned a role in government.
Yeah, I thought that was an amazing letter, and if people haven't read it, it's out there on Twitter. But he's very good at explaining that Boris is also exploding all the things that would make someone like Jesse Norman, who's an old-fashioned conservative, the things that brought him into the party. So he talks about the fact that he's a conservative because he believes in prudence and restraint, respect for tradition, all of that stuff. Boris is blowing up.
How do you respond to the suggestion that one of the things that's saving him is the absence of anybody who could obviously replace him? And I suppose I should ask you, although you probably won't answer, whether you would anoint anybody in the current front line as a possible successor, a possible replacement.
So I wouldn't anoint anybody, but I'd say that almost anybody is better than him. I think he's one of the most terrible human beings imaginable.
Human beings, not politicians.
Yeah, I think he's a terrible human being as well as a terrible, terrible prime minister. I mean, he's personally dishonest and I think a shoddy character. So I think there are probably about 200 Conservative MPs who'd be a better Prime Minister than he would be.
You're less diplomatic than you were when we last sat down in person, because I asked you whether he was dangerous and you paused for so long that it made the newspapers. I think it was a 9-second pause before. So you've come off on the fence. That not that you were on it, but are you surprised?
What did I eventually say after?
You did eventually say yes, he is dangerous, and you drew, as you often do, upon your personal interactions with him when you were both at the Foreign Office. And the perceived betrayals, not just most obviously of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, but also of people that would have expected traditionally to get help from a British government. But I mean, you've known him almost all your life, really, haven't you, in one sense or another, albeit by degrees of separation. Have you been surprised by how appalling he has proved to be, or did you see?
I think it's only when you actually see him running something that you really see how bad it is. So he's somebody that I disapproved of, and that I thought was, there's a lot of his early life, lying and being fired from his job as a journalist, his time in the Bullingdon Club, this kind of stuff disturbed me. But it's only when you actually see how somebody who lies and doesn't have a sense of shame tries to run a government department that you see what the problem is, which is basically that you can't really lead or motivate anybody. He can't inspire anyone because there's no sense of follow-through, there's no sense of conviction, and therefore he can't get anything done. I mean, that's at the core of this letter you were talking about from Jesse Norman, that there's no sense really that if he was left in for another 2.5 years, he'd achieve anything. We wouldn't have an energy policy. We wouldn't really have a recovery from COVID. There wouldn't be any levelling up. Because all he's doing, minute by minute, is struggling to try to survive from the latest scandal. And if he survives this one, there'll be another one next week.
Finally, and perhaps unfairly, I'm just going because you mentioned people won't be loyal, or there are always people who will, and again, drawing upon your knowledge of the party and elements of a shared background with this politician, I'm going to play you how Jacob Rees-Mogg responded to the last vote of no confidence in Theresa May, and then a quick snatch of how he responded to last night's events. And I'll invite you, as I've been inviting my callers for the last hour, to try to make sense of it. So here he is talking about Theresa May's result.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And here he is talking about Boris Johnson's result last night.
Good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business.
Can you make sense of that for us, Rory Stewart?
No, I think it speaks for itself. It's outrageous. And actually, if you play more of Jacob's quote, he said about Theresa May that the main reason she needed to go was the overwhelming majority of the backbenchers were against her. And in this case, far more of the backbenchers were against Boris. Everything that Jacob Rees-Mogg said means that Boris Johnson should go.
Are you surprised to see people like him becoming caught up in the Johnson, I don't know what one would call it, malaise?
No, sadly, I'm afraid he's been in on this from the beginning. I think it's very, very disturbing. And I think the people who compromised with Boris Johnson and joined his early cabinets, I think it's a great, great pity. I think people should stay as far away from the man as possible.
Well, Rory Stewart, many thanks indeed, as always, for your time and your thoughts today. It is 12:14. Rory, of course, until not that long ago, was very much a leading light in the Conservative Party and seen by many as a potential future leader, or certainly a potential future Foreign Secretary. I suspect that many people feel a sense of loss listening to that sort of analysis now from possibly even both sides of the House of Commons, but certainly from the disaffected ranks of Conservatives who we've been talking to a lot today. Not everybody's happy. I'll just read this one out from Chris. He writes, O'Brien never mentions news covering bikers, like that 41% of councils don't allow use of bus lanes and more free motorcycle parking is being removed despite the advantages to reducing pollution and congestion. Mate, I can only say sorry. I'll try and do better in the future. But at the moment, I think I'm making the right decisions about where we should be focusing our energies and attentions. I need to come up with a new question after this, which hopefully will invite... But when I said if you're feeling Chris, mate, when I said if you're feeling excluded from the conversation, I didn't mean, like, make a suggestion about a completely different topic. I mean, we're talking about Boris Johnson's loss in the vote of no confidence, but by confining it to disaffected Conservatives or people who could have a view on how Jacob Rees-Mogg can lie straight in bed after coming out with such appalling, dissembling nonsense, it was more about that than make a suggestion about a completely new topic. I mean, I'll put bikes on the long list, but for the short list, it's got to be something we might do for the next 45 minutes. So any thoughts on that? And I'll come up with a question after this. But I'm sure everybody's taken my suggestion that you come up with the next question terribly seriously, although I can tell you for nothing, there's a lot of admiration out there for Rory Stewart, even from people who would never in a million years contemplate voting for the Conservative Party. So the polar opposite, if you like, of people to whom we dedicated the first hour of the programme. But a lot of people mentioned Keir Starmer, didn't they? And I think we might do that now for the duration until it's Sheila time, because I think it is politically significant. I think it's of national importance that when you have a lame duck of a Prime Minister, a Prime Minister... Look, I'll tell you what Boris Johnson is doing now, and I don't want... I'm going to use some theoretical examples, but I don't want you to read too much into them. He is hoping for a catastrophe of sorts, like he's hoping for a General Galtieri to invade the Falkland Islands. He's hoping for the mother of all distractions from the current reality and something that might give him an opportunity to reinflate this burst balloon of a politician. So Ukraine is cited often as something he's got right. I'm not aware of any senior politician from either party who would have done anything differently with regard to Ukraine. I'm genuinely not aware of any senior politician from either the Conservative, the Labour or the Liberal Democrat Party, the Green Party or the SNP or Plaid Cymru who would have done anything differently with regard to Ukraine. We could move further and faster than many of our European allies because our dependency upon gas coming via pipelines from Russia was crushingly lower, was much, much lower. And, of course, Joe Biden had already established a template of what military aid for Ukraine looked like after Donald Trump had sought to make it contingent on getting Zelensky to join him in his corrupt pursuit of Joe Biden's son. So, you know, that's just a given. But, of course, it doesn't matter in a world of client journalism and propaganda. The portrayal of Ukraine as some sort of big win for Boris Johnson is effective. And yes, Zelensky will be pleased, or will say that he's pleased, or has said, I think, to the Financial Times editor today that he's pleased Boris Johnson is staying because it's good to have an ally in post. But Zelensky is a clever operator, and he would be saying that about any other prime minister who had done what was good for Ukraine. And what is good for Ukraine is, of course, not necessarily anything to do with what is good for the United Kingdom. Zelensky doesn't really care, and nor should he, for the record, about the cost of living crisis here, because he's got 800 dead children on his hands as a consequence of Vladimir Putin's ongoing aggression. So all he cares about is what is good for Ukraine. So let's all park the idea now that Ukraine is a big enough distraction or a big enough win, in quotes, for Boris Johnson to somehow counterbalance all the horrors that he's inflicted on his own country and continues to inflict upon his own country and, crucially perhaps, his own party. But the fact remains that a lame duck prime minister should be on the end of a stick now, being toasted like a manky old marshmallow by the leader of the opposition. I don't know that I explained myself very well earlier when I suggested that actually what many perceive as Keir Starmer's weaknesses should be perceived as strengths. That arguably sounds a little bit sycophantic on my part. But what I meant was, and I'll try again, what I meant was that I find myself irritated when Keir Starmer speaks or delivers. All right, I'm going to do something now that I don't always do. I'm going to take off the straitjacket that I normally apply to my ego before I come on the radio in the morning. I know what you're thinking. It's not a very effective straitjacket, is it, Jimbo? But I'll tell you what I sometimes think. And you've heard me blathering on for long enough, and you've heard me engage with people, and you've heard my monologues and my turns of phrase now. For this, I hope to make some sense. There are occasions when I see a Keir Starmer with an open goal in front of him, and he doesn't miss, but neither does he slam it home at 100 miles an hour. And the speech yesterday, the little statement he gave yesterday after Boris Johnson's vote of no confidence, straitjacket will go back on after this, all right? I look at that and I think I could do so much better than that. Or if I was writing a speech, I could do so much better than that. He's not zinging it. He's not landing it. He's not absolutely bossing it. He's not, in other words, somebody that would have been a brilliant debater at public school. And because I come from that background, and I was a brilliant debater at public school, I can't shake the notion that that really matters. Right, ego straitjacket back on. My God, it shouldn't matter. It took me 48 years to realise this. Well, that's not quite true. Let's say 30 years, from the end of the sixth form to 2 or 3 years ago. It really shouldn't matter. Being good at that stuff, and I nearly swore then, being good at that stuff gives absolutely no indication whatsoever of whether or not you will be good at governing a country or even running a bath. Being able to destroy an opponent in a debating chamber, being able to deliver beautifully turned phrases, being able to deliver rhetorical flourishes like verbal fireworks, all of these things are effective in the context of a debate or in the context of PMQs or in a speech to conference or in a statement in response to a loss of confidence in a prime minister or even in a party political broadcast. Being able to set off verbal fireworks shouldn't be valued as much as it is in this country. All right? And I can say that because I'm like a Guy Fawkes of verbal fireworks. But it shouldn't matter. My skill set should not matter anywhere near as much as it does in British politics. Even to the extent that absolute no-marks like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who couldn't punch his way out of a wet paper bag in a proper intellectual engagement with anybody, can somehow score points from the judges by throwing in some quotes he got out of the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations 10 minutes ago, or some barely remembered Latin from his from his school days. The skill set, it's probably a post-empire thing, that the skill set that we value and even revere in this country when it comes to rhetoric, when it comes to public speaking, when it comes to debating, is worthless when it comes to actually doing the business of government. I don't think I even realised this when Theresa May fell apart during her speech to conference a few years ago. Do you remember when the poor woman had a dreadful cough, when some comedian jumped up on the stage and handed her a fake P45, and then to cap it all, one of the letters on the Conservative slogan behind her actually fell off the wall and bounced across the stage. Even then, I think I was giving it some, oh, she should be a better speaker than this. I don't know what changed. I think possibly. And then you've got the Mail on Sunday story, that disgusting apology for journalism, referring to Angela Rayner and her genitals, and claiming that because Boris Johnson has brilliant debating skills, Oxford Union debating skills, Angela Rayner somehow has to flash her nether regions at him in order to distract him during House of Commons debates, written by a man called Glenn Owen in a newspaper edited by a man called David Dillon, because people like that often hide away from responsibility for their own actions, so it's important to give them a name check on the big show. That kind of mindset. Imagine thinking that Boris Johnson's Oxford Union debating skills were so amazing that you're now going to inflict a disgusting misogynistic attack upon the deputy leader of the Labour Party. So that's what I think might be the problem, and I could be completely wrong. I could be completely wrong. But I think that Starmer's weaknesses might be his strengths. I think that I found myself in the middle of lockdown when Boris Johnson was skipping Cobra meetings and telling lies about world-beating test and trace systems and letting cronies trouser millions and millions of pounds of our money simply because they happened to know somebody in his administration, so they got put to the front of the queue, all of that. I yearned for dullness. I yearned for it. But I wonder whether we're ever really ready for it. I think possibly we were when John Major replaced Margaret Thatcher. But I wonder whether we ever really want dullness, unless you're coming out of a war, unless you're coming out of a period of absolute mayhem, in which case a safe and steady pair of hands. May tried to do it, didn't she, when she coined the strong and stable slogan. Very much an acknowledgement of what I'm trying to articulate to you. After the madness of Brexit, we need strong and stable government. She wasn't, I don't think, in the final analysis, equipped to provide it. But I think we're in that situation again now, as Brexit becomes real, as Project Fear becomes Project Here, and as the pandemic hopefully slips further and further into the background, and as the absolute carnage of Boris Johnson's administration begins finally to start eating itself. What do you want from the leader of the opposition, if not strength and stability, if not a safe pair of hands, if not calmness, and even, dare I say, dullness? So that's why I think it's a little bit previous of people to complain or to suggest that Keir Starmer is not doing enough to win their admiration. And I say that only because I know how arrogant that sounds. Oh, I understand the way you're thinking even better than you do. I say that only because I think, like me, when you find yourself in that position, you're thinking, oh, I wish he could set off a few more fireworks, because I really like fireworks. Oh, look, a rocket. We all like fireworks. Don't phone in to tell me that you don't like fireworks. It's a figure of speech, all right? We all like fireworks, unless you're firework phobic. We all like fireworks. Keir Starmer doesn't do fireworks. He's never going to do fireworks. He's not going to try to learn to do fireworks. He's far too comfortable in his own skin to try to adopt a new identity, to try to become a show pony. He doesn't want to be. He doesn't do fireworks. Is that fair? Is it because he doesn't do fireworks that you're not warming to him, or am I being too kind to the leader of the opposition? And in fact, the problem is a little bit deeper. The reason why, and look, the plural of anecdote is never going to be data, but I think almost every caller, certainly at the top of the show, the first 2, 3, 4 callers, all coming from very different perspectives. All they had in common, really, was a lifelong commitment to voting Conservative. All of them now cut loose by Boris Johnson's administration, but all of them also, if I remember correctly, mentioning that Keir Starmer wasn't doing enough yet to tempt them into his fold. Now, is it the James O'Brien theory of fireworks that explains why Starmer isn't mopping up the support you might be expecting him to? Although they're 23 points ahead in one of the constituencies that's up for grabs. I don't know, is the short answer. What do you think he should be doing differently? Is a more interesting question for me to ask than why don't you like him as much as you might do. What do you think Keir Starmer should be doing differently is the question I want you to answer, all right? Thank you, Davey, who doesn't like fireworks. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What should Keir Starmer, if anything, what should Keir Starmer be doing differently? Enough about Johnson, let's talk about Starmer. Tracy's in Finchley. Tracy, what would you like to say?
I've been phoning you for 15 years, and this is the first time I've ever plucked up the courage to call you about anything political.
Gosh. Well,
Yeah.
you've certainly built up some anticipation now, Tracy. Don't blow it.
I hope I won't. Don't test me too much. It's not my strong suit. But I feel really strongly about this. I would love to love Keir Starmer more.
Right.
And it's all about the delivery and the voice. And I've been thinking about this for the last little while.
Yes.
I think about Ed Miliband. If he hadn't got in and David had, things would have been very, very different. I think it was his voice that put people off. And I know it sounds so shallow and so awful. I think Obama was a magnificent speaker. I thought his voice was fabulous. Cameron, great. Kwasi Kwarteng, great. Sadiq Khan, dreadful. Priti Patel, can't pronounce her G's. I know it's all incredibly superficial, but when Boris Johnson speaks, he could be literally talking rubbish.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, you listen and you think, sorry, what did he just say?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's absolute rubbish. But the way he delivers it is so convincing that even though you know he's talking BS, it's you have to listen.
It gets through. It gets under the wires.
Yes,
I mean, you've included Obama, which was clever because it slightly knocks the stuffing out of my next question, but not completely, because we're talking about something linked to class here, aren't we?
No, not necessarily.
No?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. I think it is to do with passion. It is to do with, dare I say it, actually.
Or it's not genuine passion, though, is it? Because Keir Starmer is a passionate man. I mean, his work in domestic violence, his work as DPP was truly passionate. Johnson's not passionate about anything except, well, the obvious.
But it's not what he's saying, it's how he's saying it.
Yeah.
And I think he just has a slightly unfortunate nasal twang.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that because loads of people have. We all speak in our
Same with Ed
own
Miliband,
special way.
and he looks down a lot. So what I really like about this, and you must ring me more often about politics because your honesty is incredibly refreshing. You're acknowledging that it's very shallow, but you're saying this actually works for me. And what you're describing, and this is where Obama's inclusion in your list works very well. You're describing people who are really, really good at that whole kind of university debating.
Yes.
World.
100%.
And it shouldn't matter, and it shouldn't have any bearing. It doesn't have any bearing on how good you'd be as a minister, but it works. It wins votes.
No, absolutely right. It is purely about having the conviction and having the voice that will, I don't know, maybe it's just a general type of voice that appeals to a broad spectrum of people, and the tugging the forelock thing drives me mental.
Of course, I understand.
Can't bear that.
Yes.
But actually, who else have we got? Even Neil Kinnock, he didn't have a particularly pleasant voice to listen to, but a very passionate man.
He was a great orator, Kinnock.
He was a great orator.
I personally, I did like his voice, but it's horses for courses. I give you that.
Yes. And funnily enough, Gordon Brown has grown on me.
Yes.
I used to find him a very difficult person to listen to. I used to find his facial tics very strange because he clearly wasn't comfortable sort of being in front of the camera. But I think he was the most wonderful politician and had so much important stuff to say. But for whatever reason, people didn't get on with it.
It's optics, or whatever you want to call it. And I mean, I wish it didn't matter. It's all very well. Someone, let me read you some criticism of me rather than you. Here's one. For God's sake, get over the voice. Learn to get over the superficial. It's your problem, not Starmer's. And I think we'd both agree with that. We'd both say, yes, of course, in an objective universe, these things wouldn't matter. But if you want to win a general election, you have to acknowledge that they do. And suddenly, Tracy, referencing the fact that you're calling from Finchley, the fact that Margaret Thatcher's voice changed almost beyond recognition in the journey from Backbench to Downing Street becomes
absolutely
incredibly relevant, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, there it is. Keep in touch.
Thank you, will do.
Thank you, Tracy. 15 years. I haven't been here that long, have I? 12:39 is the time. Olivia is in Bath. Olivia, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, I was just thinking, I think we're just very used to these populist politicians, Trump and Boris and Farage. I think we're really underestimating Keir Starmer for his, as you said, his weaknesses, perceived weaknesses being his strengths.
Yes.
I think it's good that he is quite measured, that he can sort of slinging insults. He can even think maybe what the other side are thinking, and very empathic. I think that's the right word.
Yes.
Very empathic man. I think we're just very used to it. And in a sense, even Jeremy Corbyn was quite a populist politician. There was all that furor around it. And when has that ever worked out for us recently? You know, I think
you mean a populist who's turned out to be good for the population?
I don't think
a bit thin on the ground, aren't they? Really?
Yeah.
But I mean, where do you sit? Where's your dial on this? Because if you're on side with Starmer, regardless of his personal style, then you're not the kind of voter he needs to win over. He needs to win over people like Tracy and Finchley, doesn't he?
Oh, definitely. I'm going to vote for him, so really he can ignore me, I suppose.
I never would ignore you. Just but he wouldn't lose your vote if well, I don't think he's ever going to do it. I mean, you can't get to the top of the legal tree in this country without being possessed of a pretty impressive skill set.
Definitely.
And being a fireworks artist was not needed to become DPP. I wish it wasn't needed to become Prime Minister, but I genuinely do think it would help.
Yeah, me too. I wish it wasn't something that people put so much store by. I mean, it's true what your previous caller said, that people do take notice of things about voices and accents, and it's a shame, really. I mean, I personally have not got a placement in London because with my northern voice, thought I couldn't handle the big city.
Oh, no.
That was the feedback I got. So it's a shame. I think it's something we need to change.
Well, and it is inherently and inextricably tied to the class structure, the class status quo. Not necessarily completely. There are other factors going on, but there is something very class-based about it, as you allude to, Olivia. And as Jez points out, Tracy talking about how Boris Johnson speaks, and he is often credited as being a good orator. By all normal measures, he isn't a good orator. He doesn't have clarity of delivery. I mean, Jez writes it best. He says he can't form a sentence, for God's sake, without umming and erring all the time. He's a hopeless orator. But he's not. He's an effective orator. He brings a room with him. That led by donkeys, it's about 8 or 9 minutes of footage going right back to that school teacher saying that he seems to think it's churlish of us to expect him to abide by the standards that bind us all. Also includes stuff of him at the Oxford Union, the full white tie and all of that malarkey all doled up to the nines. And I know what he would have been like. I'll give you an example, all right? I'll give you an example from because if you didn't go to a school like mine or a university debating, you might still not quite know what I mean. And I'll give you an example. So imagine a debate at the LSE. And I won't tell you whether or not it was me that said this because it will become clear. And you've got a bloke from public school, very comfortable in that environment, very much to the manner born, capable of, knows how to read a room, crack a joke, bring them with him. And then you've got a very passionate representative of the LGBT society, as it was then, or probably just LGB society, actually, back in the early 1990s, and stands up in the audience and objects to something that the public school boy has said because it was very male-centric. It was heterocentric. It was an observation that presumed everybody in the room was heterosexual, right? So this is the kind of thing Boris Johnson would have been very good at college, and you can disagree with me when I suggest to you this is the kind of card he would have played. So you've got the head of the LGB Society objecting to a posh public school bloke on the stage at the Debating Society because he said something, I can't remember what, that made it sound as if he thought everybody in the room was heterosexual. And she's on her feet. She's got right on her side. She is absolutely doing the work of the good. But he simply says, well, madam, I think you'll just find that you haven't found the right man yet. And in the early 90s, it wouldn't happen now, but in the early 90s, that would have brought the house down at an Oxbridge Debating Society. The denial that lesbianism even existed would have brought the house down in that sort of environment, in that sort of era. But my God, is hardly evidence that you should be trusted with the flipping sandwiches, let alone with governance or with responsibility or power. And that's what I'm talking about, that ability to make to know what will and won't work in a specific moment, simply in terms of rhetorical flourish or the ignition of a firework. And that's why people aren't warming to Starmer. And I don't think it should matter, but I think that it does, and I don't know what the answer is to that conundrum. Do you? Enough for now about Johnson. Let's talk about the other fella. Gillian is in Mitcham. Gillian, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello.
I need to know what Keir's his ideas are. What are his plans? If he wants my vote, I need to know what his ideas are about the NHS, about social housing, about education. Is he going to reinstate the ministerial code, or is he going to leave it as is in the shadow?
Well, it hasn't been changed yet, so he can't answer that one. But I wonder whether... Would we normally get this before a general election? Do we normally... I mean, because you don't publish your manifesto 2 years out, do you? Would we normally expect a leader of the opposition to have a clearer vision of what he's going to do? We know the windfall tax was a big thing, don't we? They were very much on side with the windfall tax, and now that the Tories have nicked it, it kind of leaves him a bit potless.
I think it's important that we do know what his ideas are about these sorts of things. How can I give him my vote if I don't know what he plans to do if he gets into power? I need to know. My son said to me, plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Give me your ideas, give me your plans, Keir, so I know whether or not you will get my vote.
I like
That's what I need to know.
I'm sure he's a bright lad, Gillian, but I don't think he came up with that one all by himself.
Well, that's what he told me.
Sounds like a man after my own heart. There you go. But I mean, if I were here to bat for Keir Starmer, which I'm not, then I would suggest that it is early doors. But it's certainly something he is going to have to do as the clock ticks. The closer you get to a general election, the more important it is to have a clear idea of precisely what you would be voting for in terms of policy. But you know, in a way, Gillian speaks to the broader conversation that we're having as well, because. What did Boris Johnson stand for? Except getting Brexit done, which didn't really mean anything, but didn't matter because you had this sort of fireworks phenomenon going on at the same time. 12:50 is the time. Thank you, Gillian. Regards to your boy. Dave's in Leicester. Dave, what would you like to say?
Just picking up a similar point to your previous speaker.
Yes.
And I'm a Labour Party member and have been for a number of years. I describe myself as being left of centre.
Yeah.
But what I don't see from him is passion. If you take somebody like Burnham or even Corbyn at two different extremes within the Labour Party, they speak with passion, conviction. He just doesn't come across like that to me. There's no dynamism there.
Yeah, well, dynamism is another word. Passion. See, we are talking about speaking style here rather than content and substance, though, aren't we, Dave?
No, but we need both. We need content. As your previous speaker said, we need content and energy and dynamism. And without that, there's no leadership. You've got to have
I'm going to pick you up on this. I'm going to pick you up on this because I don't think that being a passionate speaker provides any indication whatsoever of whether you would be a good Prime Minister.
I agree with you. You need to back that up with substance and strategy. Back it up with those two, with the passion and the dynamism, and then you've got a plan, a cunning plan.
A cunning plan. I don't know if he needs a cunning plan.
I couldn't resist that.
and if you had to choose between the two, I think we'd all choose a really impressive policy platform, because I'm not sure that fireworks and dynamism are on the table. I don't think they're up on offer.
But actually, that's what we need within the Labour Party. We need that. We need that balance between the vision, dynamism, and strategy.
Yeah, because what we're doing, because we need to legislate for the real world. We need to talk about winning elections in the real world, not in the world that we wish was real, where being very good at speaking or debating or having an ability to set off Catherine wheels doesn't matter. We live in a world where it does, full stop, which is why Tracy and Finchley was such a brilliant first call on this one.
And that's why your comments about the debating style of Johnson, I mean, it is very good. It is very convincing.
Yeah.
And that's the downfall.
Even when you can see through it, you can still see how it works, and you can still fall for it occasionally.
He convinces people. He cons people. He's very good. He's a bloody good salesman. He is very good.
But clearly,
what he doesn't have is a substance behind that, and of course, a level of honesty and truth and responsibility.
Well, he sold an entire country a box with a picture of a toaster on it and convinced 52% of them that there was a toaster inside, when really it was full of old bricks. Nicely put, Dave. Thank you. Francis is in Warminster. Francis, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I think one of the problems we've got with Keir Starmer is his lack of ability to have a position in the media that is not about either Boris Johnson's behaviour or particularly over the last couple of years. He's actually, as opposition, his job has been to support the government in pretty much all that it's been doing. And so,
even as the leader of the government attacks him for not supporting them, that again is an example of the street skills, if you like, or the things you wish didn't work in politics working. Starmer is offering full-throated support on everything from Ukraine to a lot of the COVID policy, and Johnson stands up and says you weren't with us at all.
Nobody should get vaccinated in this country. Labour are totally against vaccination. just to be opposition, you know.
I know, you're right. So he hasn't carved out his own space yet, and that I think may be largely due to circumstance rather than.
It's a lot about circumstance, because obviously he was elected, came into office after the pandemic had started, and I think I was reminded of this really yesterday morning when he was on with Nick.
Yes.
I didn't listen to all of it, but from what I heard, he was talking about Boris Johnson.
Right.
And not talking about
He can only respond to the questions he's asked, so I don't know what the callers were saying. And after the vote of no confidence, or prior to the vote of no confidence, it's a bit inevitable. But you're dead right, actually.
But
you're dead right. He needs to stop. I'm sure he'd love to. We barely spoke about Boris Johnson when I did my full disclosure interview with him, because it's
I listened to that.
Well, then you'll know it's designed to find out more about him, and I hope you did find out more about him. But that sticks out like a sore thumb in the context of his public appearances, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and it's also he's obviously got the opposition media for him as well.
Yeah, well, that's true.
He's not being given a free ride in any of the papers. He's smug on one of them this morning, I think I saw.
That's an astonishing front page on the Daily Mail. I mean, it is.
Mail?
But David Aranovich of the Times has described it quite perfectly as the worst kind of propaganda. In fact, Francis, I'm going to jump on that as a quick reminder from you and let people know exactly how Aranovich picked apart this Daily Mail front page, because it is always interesting to see this. There it is. So, by the way, he writes, the Mail's front page this morning is a work of pure propaganda in the literal sense. It links a supposed physical characteristic, Starmer's smirk, which Francis just alluded to a non-existent threat, i.e. a coalition of chaos, while heroising Johnson's response to a major setback. It also takes its readers for either Tory zealots or idiots, which is unwise in either instance. And this is as 148 Tory MPs hit the self-destruct button by opening door to smirking Starmer's coalition of chaos. And there is a picture on the front page of Keir Starmer smiling in quite a, I would say, normal fashion, while Boris Johnson is, I don't know quite how you describe his lips, or indeed why any journalist would be trying to. It's coming up to 12:57. Thank you, Francis. Last word on this, probably, because it's nearly Sheila time, and there's something I want to leave you with, to Matt in Kilburn. Matt, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I think it's something that I've thought about for quite a while, because I'm sort of a Lib Lab supporter. I've fluctuated over the years. I've never supported Tories, but I did listen to your podcast with Sir Keir, and I thought it was interesting. I've got a lot of time for the guy. I genuinely do, and I think I'm one of those voters who's probably a bit less difficult to win over than some, because I think he stands for one thing for me primarily above everything else, and he stands for integrity.
Yes.
So for your question as to what he should do differently, I don't think he should do anything differently, because that's who he is.
Yes.
And either you buy into that or you don't. But there's been some great contributions from. I was very aligned with what Tracy said. I'd always thought that when I listen to him speak, I feel like I'm listening to Ed Miliband.
Yes.
Which for me, from an oratory point of view, isn't necessarily a good thing.
Sure.
But we're talking about leadership credentials. Ultimately, that's what this comes down to. And some people have it, and some people don't. And I think Gordon Brown didn't have it. Tony Blair did.
Yeah.
Some people are born to support, and maybe that's going to be his role moving forward. Is that there's going to be someone else in the party who's got a little bit more fireworks, to use your word, or a bit more ability to generate admiration, and he's just going to be that really strong bastion of integrity that plays that role.
Depending on what Durham Constabulary do in the next few weeks, of course. Although, actually, his status as a bastion of integrity doesn't necessarily get diminished by either verdict coming down from Durham. Matt, thank you very much. And speaking of things on the horizon, you've got 2 by-elections and a Privileges Committee investigation into whether or not Boris Johnson lied to the House of Commons. And, of course, now that we know 148 MPs are prepared to vote against him in a secret ballot, you only need 40-odd to vote against him in a public ballot for any vote of no confidence in the House of Commons to actually be carried, or any vote suggestion from the Privileges Committee to suspend him.
Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Kill him already. Kill him. Just fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him already. Kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Fucking kill him. Kill him, just fucking kill him. Kill him already. Kill him already. Kill him. Amen.